So just as a bit of background, I think we've already talked about some of this, but nutrition-sensitive agriculture programs consistently improve agriculture production and dietary diversity. However, evidence of impact on nutritional status outcomes is still weak. And to fill this evidence gap, IFPRI and HKI, as Victoria mentioned, have been collaborating over the last 10 years to design and implement variations on their enhanced homestead food production program model to find ways in which we can strengthen the impacts on child nutritional status outcomes. Two of these have taken place in Burkina Faso, the first of which was the evaluation of the enhanced homestead food production program, in which the research was done between 2010 and 2012, and this was a randomized controlled trial. And then the second is the change program, which we are focusing on today. When the research for that was done between 2014 and 2016, and that was also a randomized trial, but without a pure control group. As Victoria mentioned, the impacts on the HFP program that we found when we compared the EHFP program, which was the first 4 components that Stella mentioned, compared to a control group, we found significant impacts on reducing child anemia by 15 percentage points in the most effective treatment arm, wasting by 9 percentage points, and diarrhea by 16 percentage points. We found the greatest impacts when the BCC was implemented by health committee members and among younger children. We also looked at the pathways of impacts. We looked at the intermediary outcomes that were believed to lie along the hypothesized impact pathways, and we found significant impacts on women's production of nutrient-rich foods, child dietary diversity, nutrition health-related knowledge, and on women's empowerment. However, in that study, we did not find an impact on stunting, and the prevalence of anemia was still very high at endline at about 77%. So when we went to design the change program and the associated evaluation that would go along with that, we had a goal of trying to find ways to increase the program's impact on anemia and to find a way, to see if there was a way to use the EHFP program to also reduce stunting. And we also wanted to see if we could target younger children, so if we could reach those children at an earlier time point. And so we were looking at trying to increase the impact on anemia and stunting among children 0 to 12 months of age at baseline. There were 3 ways in which we thought this could happen, 2 of which Stella mentioned. The first was increasing duration of exposure. So for this, it was a repeated exposure to the EHFP program, which is the ag production, the BCC, the poultry production, and the women's empowerment activities. The second was adding the WASH component, and then the third was adding the LNS, which Stella mentioned. To test these hypotheses, we went back to the same villages that participated in the original EHFP evaluation back in 2010, between 2010 and 2012. In that study, we had 25 control villages and 30 treatment villages. To the control group, to the original control group, we added 5 villages that had not been intervened in during the 2010 to 2012 period, but had the same characteristics as the original control villages. We then randomized the control villages to receive one of 2 programs, either the EHFP program, which again was the ag, the BCC on nutrition, the poultry, and the women's empowerment activities, or to receive that program plus the WASH component. The original treatment villages were randomized to receive the EHFP program again in 2014 at the village level, so they received it between 2010 and 2012 at the village level, and then again in 2014. And then the first randomized group also got the WASH, but nothing else. And then the other group that we randomized the original treatment groups to received the HFP program for the second time in 2014, the WASH, and the LNS. So to answer the first question about whether or not repeated exposure to this program or a longer-term exposure at a community level would increase nutritional impacts, we compared the 2 groups that varied just on the number of times they received the program at the community level. So they either received it starting in 2014 for the first time or in 2010. And this is at the community level because in both cases, the targeting was to mothers with children of a certain age range. So in the first evaluation, it was targeted to mothers with children between 3 and 12 months of age. And in the second, for mothers with children between 0 and 12 months of age. So there was about a 30% overlap in who these mothers were. So there were about 30% of the mothers who directly benefited from the program twice, but most of the exposure was at the community level. So they would have seen the village model farms, may have been exposed to some messages, but weren't direct beneficiaries of that first program. To answer the second question about the added benefit of WASH, we compared the two groups that just varied on that. So we went to the old control villages and compared the group that received just the EHFP program, which isn't just a program, it's a very complex program, but that program, and then compared that to the group that received EHFP plus WASH. And then, of course, to do the same, to look at just the added benefit of LNS, we compared the two groups that differed just on exposure to LNS. So for this, we went back to the original treatment villages, where they either had this repeated exposure to the HFP program plus WASH, or the repeated exposure to the program plus WASH plus LNS. This was a longitudinal study with baseline in 2014 between February and May, and an end line in 2016, about the same time of year. And we followed the same households, mothers, and children over time. So the children were 0 to 12 months at baseline and about 24 to 36 months at end line. The primary nutritional status outcomes that we were interested in were anemia, iron deficiency anemia, vitamin A deficiency, and stunting and wasting. As we didn't have a regular control group, we looked at changes over time in the EHFP 2014 group, which just received the EHFP program. We expected changes in that group to be similar to what we found as impacts in the original impact evaluation. So we expected to see a decrease in anemia, increases in maternal knowledge, increases in production of nutrient-rich foods, et cetera. And then to assess the differential impacts according to those questions about increasing duration of exposure, including WASH or including LNS, we looked at differential impacts between the groups that I just mentioned using difference in difference impact estimates, which are the change between baseline and end line between groups. And those estimates included controls for maternal and child characteristics, and the standard errors were adjusted for clustering at the village level. So our first question was, what was the added benefit of prior community level exposure to the HFP program? And I'm only going to talk about the significant results, so if I don't mention it, it means there was no significant impact on those outcomes. And so for prior community level exposure, the only significant impact we found on nutritional status outcomes was a maintenance of weight for height Z-score in the group that had the previous exposure to the program. So as you can see, the yellow dotted line is the group that received the HFP program for the first time in 2010 and again in 2014, and their weight for height Z-score didn't change over the 2-year period. Whereas in the group that had their first exposure in 2014, the weight for height Z-score went down, as can happen in this age group. And so this led to a differential impact of about 0.16 weight for height Z-scores. However, this did not translate into a significant effect on the prevalence of wasting. Next, we look at the added benefit of including WASH in addition to the HFP program. And here, the significant impact we saw on nutritional status outcomes was in the change in anemia prevalence. So the red dotted line is the EHFP 2014 group, so the group that just received the HFP program for the first time in 2014. And as you can see, the prevalence of anemia went down by about 15 percentage points, which is about the same as we saw as an impact in the first evaluation. But then when you added the WASH component, which is the blue dashed line, you see an additional impact on top of the regular HFP program of about 11 percentage points. And then looking at the impact on iron deficiency anemia, we see that in both cases the prevalence of iron deficiency anemia goes down, but it's not significantly different between the two groups. Lastly, we look at what was the added benefit of providing a lipid-based nutrient supplement, or LNS, in addition to WASH and EHFP. And here we see impacts across many nutritional status outcomes. We first have impacts on anemia and iron deficiency anemia. The green line is the group that received all interventions, so EHFP in 2010, in 2014, the WASH, and then additionally the LNS. And the yellow line is the group that received the EHFP program plus WASH, but no LNS. And again, we can see that the prevalence of anemia goes down over time in both groups, but it goes down more so in the group that received the LNS. So in this case, the added benefit of including LNS in addition to all those other program activities was another 13 percentage point decline in anemia. We see the same for iron deficiency anemia prevalence in this group, so we see a greater decline of about 13 percentage points in iron deficiency anemia as well as in just anemia. We also found impacts on vitamin A status. We see that in the group that received the LNS, there was not a change in the concentration of retinol binding protein, which is a marker for vitamin A, whereas it went down in the group that did not receive the LNS. And this did translate into a significant impact on the prevalence of vitamin A deficiency. In this case, it's a maintenance of a high level of vitamin A deficiency, which is not great, but in the group that did not receive the LNS, it actually went up over time. And so that led to a significant impact of about 9 percentage points. Lastly, we look at the impact on linear growth for children who were 0 to 12 months of age at baseline. And here, as is typical in this age group, and you have to remember the comparisons from 0 to 12 months to 24 to 36 months between groups. And we see that the height for age Z-score goes down over time, but it goes down less so in the group that received the LNS, which led to a differential impact of about 0.15 height for age Z-scores. And then when we look at the prevalence of stunting, again, the prevalence of stunting went up over time, which is typical in this age group, but it went up less so in the group that received the lipid-based nutrient supplement, for a differential impact of about 8 percentage points. So in summary, looking at the 2-year change in the EHFP program, we see a decrease of 15 percentage points over time in the group that received the EHFP program. In iron deficiency anemia, we see an increase in vitamin A status, or vitamin A deficiency, and an increase in stunting, which again happens over this age group, and then a decrease in the prevalence of wasting. The added benefit of prior exposure to the program was just this maintenance of the weight for height Z-score, which was an effect of about 0.16 Z-scores. The added benefit of WASH was this greater decrease in the prevalence of anemia, about 11 percentage points. And then the added benefit of LNS, again, was for anemia, iron deficiency anemia, vitamin A deficiency, and stunting. And lastly, I just want to show a slide that illustrates very well the point about how using a multi-sectoral approach can lead to bigger impacts, and in this case, on anemia. So the first graph is an impact graph from our study of the EHFP program between 2010 and 2012, where the black solid line is the control group, and you can see that the prevalence of anemia is high, about 85 or 86% at baseline, and it does not change over the 2 years. And these were children 3 to 12 months at baseline, and then about 27 to 36 months at endline. In our most effective treatment group, which is the dashed dotted line, the prevalence of anemia goes down by about 15 percentage points. So this is the EHFP program delivered by health committee members. Next, I look at a graph from an LNS efficacy trial. So this is where LNS was given to children 9 to 18 months of age in another area of Burkina Faso around the same time. This is a highly controlled trial where they're giving the LNS daily. And what we see again is in the control group, or the non-intervention group that did not receive the LNS, the prevalence of anemia was high and remained high over their 2-year study period. And it went down by about 12 percentage points in the group that received the LNS. And then lastly, we look at the effect of the change program. And again, we don't have a control group, so we can't fully attribute this. We can't attribute the change in anemia in the EHFP group to the program, but we can say that the change in anemia prevalence in the EHFP alone group is very similar to what we saw in the most effective treatment group where we did have an actual control group. And so that's the red line, where we see this 15 percentage point decline in the prevalence of anemia. And then the blue line shows when we add WASH, and there's this increase in the impact on anemia by about another 11 percentage points. And then when you add the full package with this repeated exposure, the WASH and the LNS, you have a decrease in the prevalence of anemia about 32 percentage points over a 2-year period, which is impressive in this context. So in conclusion, we believe that addressing the multiple causes of undernutrition simultaneously through multi-sectoral programs increases program effectiveness for children's nutritional status outcomes. We think that nutrition-sensitive agriculture programs in contexts like Burkina Faso should consider including SQ-LNS to children aged 6 to 24 months of age, and possibly a WASH intervention to optimize program impacts on children's nutritional status. It's possible that earlier or longer individual level exposure rather than just the community level exposure to the program may further improve impacts. We also believe that these kind of program research partnerships can really improve program effectiveness, especially over a longer time frame. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge the funding from Global Affairs Canada for this program and evaluation, and also A4NH for some supplementary funding. Also the HKI team in Burkina Faso, and the West Africa office, the APRJ, who is the primary implementing partner in Burkina Faso, our research team here at IFPRI, which was many more people than just me, obviously, and then all the data collection teams and beneficiaries of the change program. So thank you.